Okay, Chair, we're now live.
Lovely, thank you. So welcome to the first virtual meeting of the Scrutiny Commission for Charnwood Borough Council. There are a number of things I would like to remind people of before we start with the items on the agenda. Please note that this meeting is being live streamed and recorded, and the recording will be made available on the Council's website following the meeting. Under the openness of local government bodies regulations, people may film or record this meeting, and this is outside the Council's control. However, people wishing to film or record the meeting should do so in a way that does not disrupt the business of the meeting. Also, so that meeting is not disturbed, could I ask everyone present to please turn off your mobile phones or switch them to silent and ensure that your environment is distraction-free. And can I remind everyone that this is a public meeting, so please conduct yourself in an appropriate manner. Thank you. As this is a virtual meeting, it will run slightly differently. Members will need to introduce themselves and state their name and confirm that they can hear and see the proceedings. This is important for the purposes of recording attendance and transparency of the meeting. I will do this by undertaking our alphabetical roll call. Members will use the raise hand feature in the participants section of the Zoom software if they wish to speak, and will be allowed to do so in a queue system. So if we can go ahead and confirm our attendance. So if everyone can confirm that they are present and that they can see and hear the proceedings. If we go first to Councillor Bailey.
Good evening, Chair. Councillor Bailey, present. I can see and hear the proceedings.
Thank you. And Councillor Baines.
I can see and hear the proceedings. Sorry about that. I had to turn my mic off. Okay.
That's okay. Thank you. Councillor Bolton.
Councillor Bolton here. I can see and hear the proceedings.
Thank you. Councillor Draycott.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm here and I can see the meeting.
Councillor Hadji Nicolau. Oh, Councillor Draycott, I don't know if you need to unmute.
Have I caused that?
I'm not sure. Councillor Hadji Nicolau, I think you might need to unmute yourself.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, I can do
great.
now, yeah.
I can see and hear.
Lovely.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Parsons.
Yes, I can see and hear. Councillor Parsons.
Lovely. And I'm Councillor Rattray and I can see and hear everything. Okay, so if we do the same and go through with the officers that we've got present. So if we start off with the Chief Exec, so Rob Mitchell.
Thank you, Chair. I'm here and I can hear and see. Thank you.
Thank you. And Eileen Mallon.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I can see and hear the proceedings. Thank you.
Simon Jackson.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I can both hear and see.
We've got Councillor Harper Davies.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I can hear and see you.
And Sylvia Wright.
Thank you, Chair. I can see and hear you.
And we've got Matt Goodger with us.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I can hear and see the proceedings.
Karen Widowson.
Hello, Karen Widowson, Democratic Services Manager, and I can hear and see proceedings. Thank you.
Thank you. Nikki Conway.
Democratic Services Officer Nikki Conway. I can hear and see the proceedings.
Thanks, Nikki. Laura Strong. Oh, we've not got Laura with us this evening, have we? And Sally Watson.
I can hear and see the proceedings.
That's lovely, thank you. So that's everyone that's present. So if we get on to the first item, which is apologies. We've not had any apologies this evening, so everyone's present. I'll move on to item 2. So minutes from the previous meeting, which was the 9th of March 2020. Just want everyone just to indicate if they have any amends from the meeting before we move. We will actually do a raise hand just for everyone to agree whether they agree to the minutes from the previous meeting. So if anyone, first of all, has any amends or comments, please state that now. No, I don't see any raised hands. I have one. So it's just on the recommendations from, there we are. on page 5. So we've got 12 resolutions, and there's an item 13. So we just need to add in that the recycling rate targets be reviewed to reflect a more realistic desire to improve. This was just missed off from the minutes, but it was presented to Cabinet and responded to. Coco, shush. Okay, so if we just go to a roll call again, just for everyone to confirm that they're happy with the minutes, but with that one amend. Okay, so if we start with Councillor Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with the minutes.
Thank you. Councillor Baines.
I agree with the minutes.
Councillor Bolton.
I agree with the minutes.
Councillor Draycott. Oh, I think you just muted, Councillor Draycott. I didn't catch that, Councillor Draycott. I think you might be muted.
Sorry, Chair, there seems to be a bit of a technical issue, but carry on, please.
Yeah, if you just confirm that you're...
Sorry, agree.
Yeah, thank you. It just didn't come through before. Councillor Hadji Nicolau.
I agree with the minutes.
Thank you. Councillor Parsons.
Yes, happy with the minutes.
And I'm happy with them too. So that's fine, all confirmed. If we go to item 3, so disclosures of pecuniary and personal interest. We've not had any sent through, but is there anything that anybody needs to raise now? No? That's fine, so that we don't have any disclosures of pecuniary or personal interest for this evening's meeting. So we move on to item 4, which is declarations of the party whip. Not aware of anything to report. Karen, has anything come through to you?
No, none received.
No, so we don't have any declarations of the party whip. Item 5 is questions under Scrutiny Commission Procedure 11.16. There's no questions were submitted. So we've got item 6, which is a discussion paper, which is the approach to scrutiny during COVID-19 pandemic. So if I hand over to Karen Widdowson, she's going to take us through the report. Thanks, Karen.
Thank you, Chair. So this is a discussion paper based on guidance produced by the Centre for Public Scrutiny, setting out the challenges carrying out scrutiny during the pandemic. My plan is to go through just the highlights of the report, because I understand that most of you will have read it beforehand. But the key points I wish to highlight is that the Council does not have a discretion to dispense with scrutiny, as it forms a substantial part of the governance framework. And therefore, this evening, the Scrutiny Commission needs to set out an approach for the next 6 months of how it wishes the scrutiny function to run. Also, when making this recommendation, it needs to bear in mind that the level of support needs to be proportionate and fits with the constrained resources that councils have at their disposal at the present time. And something also that the scrutiny, the Centre for Public Scrutiny particularly pointed out, was that carrying on with a full complement of scrutiny meetings and existing work programmes is not possible at this time due to the level of resources that are needing to be focused into the pandemic relief. So in terms of, I'm turning now onto page number 16 of the report. In terms of the scrutiny structure, there's 2 potential options that need to be considered. One is that using the Scrutiny Commission with its existing membership, a monthly cycle of meetings, or using the membership of the calling committee, which includes all the Scrutiny Committee chairs and vice chairs. If this, depending on which option you go for, both options actually require that the current cycle of the directorate-based scrutiny meetings for the next 6 months would need to be suspended with a review in due course. Further consideration would be the potential that the special responsibility allowances may potentially need to be suspended, and that's something that the Scrutiny Commission may wish to discuss. I would point out, however, that members at any time can forego their special responsibility allowances by informing the Head of Strategic Support. In terms of what to scrutinise, that is set out on page 16 of the report, and things that could be scrutinised going forward are situation reports, action trackers, and giving an oversight on critical matters. Some of those things don't actually need a meeting. They could be done through a remote video briefing, a little bit like our monthly member development training sessions. So that's something to think about. In terms of the agenda items, so when you look on page 17 of the report, the Centre for Public Scrutiny recommends that there's various options there. Options 1 and 2, points 1 and 2, these can actually be adopted straight away. And I would add that we can have simplify the report as well for officers, so that officers' time is not spent writing reports. A very brief report could be produced in that respect, and then it would be supplemented by verbal updates at the meeting. Point 3 is about questions from members of the public. Now, that is already undertaken at Charnwood. It's in our constitution already, and we have that facility. So it's potentially we could promote that more than what we are doing at the present time, to hear what members of the public wish to say. The Centre for Public Scrutiny did also say that live questioning is a possibility. I would not recommend that, because managing live questioning in a virtual meeting would be quite difficult to do, but this is obviously what's been highlighted by the Centre for Public Scrutiny. And then item 4.4 on page 17 is actually would be quite beneficial. So this is where the chair or maybe one of the members give an update on issues that they are hearing and seeing in their own wards concerning the pandemic. Other considerations which need to be taken into account going forward is the fact that the finance of the authority needs to be looked at very carefully, because the pandemic has had a significant impact. So that is one consideration, and the Centre for Public Scrutiny suggests that the Audit Committee has a very important role in that, and potentially the chair and vice chair of the Scrutiny Commission, or whichever framework we end up with, actually has more to do with the Audit Committee chairman as more liaison. I also was reading earlier that in the item 8 on the agenda, it states that budget scrutiny may be in some form, and it's therefore I'm going to suggest that possibly a further report comes back on budget scrutiny and the budget process, so that the Scrutiny Commission can give direction of how budget scrutiny panel should be operating through the pandemic period. And also, finally, I just wanted to highlight that something else that the Centre for Public Scrutiny talked about was the use of calling, and that the calling mechanism should only be used in very extreme circumstances, because of the level of resource that's required to instigate a calling. Obviously, we cannot stop callings, but it is a clear direction from the Centre for Public Scrutiny. So that's a very brief summary of the guidance that's come through from the Centre for Public Scrutiny, and it's now over to members to discuss what structure and how they would like scrutiny to operate in the next foreseeable future. I'm suggesting up until the end of November. Thank you.
Thanks, Karen. If members want to speak, if you can just raise your blue hand. I'm just going to go through some comments that I've got, and then I'll move on to the members as soon as I know who's raised their hand, and we'll go through in the order. From my perspective, I completely understand that we want to reduce down the workload for officers, and the response to COVID-19 recovery is definitely our number one priority. I'm not 100% sure that we need to be postponing the directorate committees for a full 6 months. That would be where I'm a little bit unsure on. If we have the option to pull it in, obviously 6 months is a long time, and things are moving so quickly that we could be in a completely different situation come December time than where we are now. So that would be a reservation that I have on that, but I understand why we want to move in that direction. Just picking up on a couple of things in the report, just under the managing agenda items, obviously one of the things that Karen picked up on was the one key scrutiny item. I think that's a really good idea, and the way I would see that going forward, if people agree, is when we come on to the next report where it goes through the COVID recovery, we can see that the structure's been split into 3 cells. The way I would like to see this is that one key item that comes to every scrutiny meeting is the head of each of the cell comes, and we have a review of that recovery cell, which then we get a report of where we're up to, members are able to ask questions, and then we include, I really like the idea of including questions from the public. And I think that, although I agree with Karen, I think going live with those questions might be a step too far for us at the moment. I certainly think if people were able to send in video questions, I think that would really add something to the meeting and allow our members of the public to be able to contribute a lot more and question and scrutinise the council as well. The agenda item part 4, so managing the agenda part 4, I'm a little unsure as to how that's going to work going forward. So I think if we go down that road, it's an option there. But I just think we probably needs a little bit more talking through as to how we might manage that going forward. So I'm going to move on to Councillor Draycott.
Thank you, Chair. I fully support the direction that's proposed in the report. I also feel that we've got a long way to go before it's business as usual. And I think that having a scrutiny sort of executive would fit very well with the way that Cabinet will be working. My favourite option is for the main scrutiny commission to be that committee because of a number of reasons. It's ready to go, doesn't need any changes to the constitution. Its work ethic fits because it's used to holding regular meetings every 3 or 4 weeks. And importantly, it has a fixed membership. And to me, 6 months seems reasonable. I'm sure if things rapidly improve and the 6 months is no longer needed, we can always come back and revisit this decision. It's not set in stone, I'm sure. Finally, a couple of matters from the report itself to do with questions. It would be good to have some sort of questions being available to the public. I accept to begin with that may be difficult, so they could be in writing and could be part of the agenda or presented at the meeting, and then say after the first couple of meetings reviewed, and as you said, Chair, then when we're more used to working virtually, that could be looked at again. And finally, I do welcome the strengthening of the role of Scrutiny Commission and audit. I don't think that's ever been the case, and I think those two would work very well together. So support the direction of the report, Chair. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Draycott. So we're going to move to Councillor Bolton now.
Thank you, Chair. My comment is very much aligned with Councillor Draycott's second comment. I've felt for the year I've been a councillor that there needs to be a much closer working relationship between Scrutiny Commission and Audit Committee. So I very much support that.
Thanks, Councillor Bolton. We've not got any... Councillor Parsons has just raised his hand. So if we move to Councillor Parsons, thank you.
I agree with creating a single body to deal with the scrutiny function at the moment. I am concerned that that body is as equally well briefed as Cabinet in terms of being up to date with the issues and being able to move in a timely fashion. On the audit and finance issues, the finances are very interwoven with pretty much everything we do, from budget through treasury, through commercialisation, and those decisions reach across all aspects of the council. So I'm also concerned that we ensure that the budget scrutiny, but in the wider context to incorporate all aspects of the budget, treasury, capital, etc., are fully looked after in this period, because they are undoubtedly going to be some of the biggest issues that confront us as soon as the front line of, for want of a better phrase, our helping of people, which is constant, but the council will eventually come back to a sense of reality with regard to the financial framework which supports the council going forward. And I'm keen that we are in a good position, whatever structure we create, to properly scrutinise financial decisions and to understand what's happening with those decision-making processes. So as far as I can see, from what little I can see at the moment, I don't think the outturn 1920 accounts are coming to the June audit meeting. And I don't think Cabinet are passing the outturn 1920 accounts. I think they're just being reported to Cabinet on July the 7th. So there are nuances to what's happening with the finances, just to use that as an example, which the group of people, one or two of us who cross-audit, cross-budget, cross-scrutiny, and have actively maintained a strong interest in all aspects of the finances, are probably concerned about going forward. So I feel on those two issues, the way that whatever vehicle is created is briefed is extremely important to me. And the capturing of all of the financial aspects to allow us to view things not in simple isolation, because these decisions all match. So we've created a commercialisation and role which is looking at property potentially, but might have to change in view of COVID and what may happen to property prices, which affects our income stream in treasury, which affects our revenue. And I know to some extent these are blown out the water by the current scale of money that's not coming in. 3.3 million, I think, is the figure referenced in the report. So those two aspects, I think, need to very carefully be thought about. How whatever we create is briefed and who is briefed, to decide how we create our agendas and how we look after the financial aspects together with Audit Committee, and how we are on top of that. And we're not just seeing single slices of it, which don't make sense unless they're stuck together.
Thank you, Councillor Parsons. I've not got anybody else who's indicating they want to speak, but I just wanted to mention that there's a couple of other aspects that are in the reports that we've not really covered at the moment. So we're being asked for our views on what happens with councillors' special allowances, and also whether we agree to suspend the panels. I personally don't think that we should be looking at adjusting any allowances. Obviously, we don't know what's going to happen, and we may call these meetings in a little sooner than the 6 months. And I think to make any hard and fast rule on that, I personally think is wrong. We're not making a decision on that today. We're just being asked to give our opinions. And on the panel side of it, I do think it is the right thing to suspend panels, other than what happens with budget. I think all the other panels that we've got going or on the list at the moment, personally, I think that we should just leave. And then in 6 months' time, we come back, we review the existing panels, and most likely we'll have other priorities by then. So I think we just say that we leave everything where it is. And in 6 months' time, we review what panels we want to go with, whether that be progressing with ones we've started or whether it's new priorities. But if other people want to have comments on that, please. I can see Councillor Draycott wants to speak, so we'll move to Councillor Draycott. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. By the report tonight, it's suggesting to Cabinet that there is a main scrutiny committee, or whatever you want to call it, and by agreeing that, we're agreeing that they are the ones only who deal with scrutiny, and that the only scrutiny business possibly for the next 6 months will be the recovery plan, which is the priority for the council. It won't be business as usual with the normal usual reports, apart from possibly pre-scrutinising other pre-scrutinising cabinet reports. So if you've got a main scrutiny committee meeting to deal with that business, there is no role for the other 3 scrutiny departmental committees, and you cannot justify having them up and running and being paid allowances. It's taxpayers' money if they're not doing any business. As the report clearly says, if things change and improve dramatically, then it will be reviewed and those committees can come back into play. But at the meantime, we are still at a very serious situation in this country, right? We've got a long way to go. Decisions need to be scrutinised quickly, efficiently and smartly, and the current structure won't allow us to do that. So I support what's in the report. It has to be the Scrutiny Commission for all the reasons given. That has to be the one and only committee until Council decides differently, if that's what Cabinet agree later on in the week, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Baines.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that it seems to me that I agree with that broadly, what Councillor Draycott's just said around the need for could and should, as Councillor Parsons said, take into account the budget situation. So I think there's a need for us to regularly be updated on how the budget is affecting the COVID arrangements and implementation. So I do think that elements of the budget scrutiny panel should be essentially be incorporated within that main meeting. I think that's very, very important. With regards to allowances, I'm a little bit agnostic in some ways. I do think we should look at this carefully and assess exactly what work's involved in a more regular scrutiny commission meeting now, and potentially more work, but obviously less than we would have seen in the past. So that's all I would say about that at this particular point.
Thank you, Councillor Baines. If we move to Councillor Parsons.
Yeah, I just go back to my point. I'm interested to hear from officers in terms of their view on briefings, on how we might be briefed. At the end of the day, I think what we suggest to Cabinet is likely to be passed because we own scrutiny. So what we put forward shouldn't be too heavily challenged in terms of the way we would wish to scrutinise council. And as long as we don't put something ridiculous forward, I wouldn't expect Cabinet to challenge that as scrutiny owns scrutiny. And I think that's fairly clear in the role of scrutiny. And what I am interested to know is officers' views on how we would be briefed and kept up to date in real time, or as close to real time, with the direction of travel with regard to the recovery plan.
We've got Rob Mitchell, I think, is going to come in on that one for us.
Thank you, Chair. So just to respond to the point raised by Councillor Parsons, I think in terms of regular briefings, I'm confident we'll provide you with information as a scrutiny commission. I don't see it as a policy development committee, but I do think it would be feasible for us to provide regular updates on what is happening and how we are delivering against the recovery plan. I thought the suggestions made earlier by yourself, Chair, in terms of having a focus on the 3 elements of the recovery plan could be quite helpful, and it might be important to keep the members updated with progress. So I don't see there's a major issue with that. I think it depends on because it's so fast moving, it is very, very difficult to keep everybody updated, and we do need some space and time as officers to continue with the day-to-day issues. But on the major issues around budget or related to significant items in the recovery plan, I'm sure through the work of this committee and its agenda looking forward, we could provide you with updates and briefings on what is happening as we see things emerge. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. Is there anybody else that wants to speak on this item? You just indicate now for me. We just go to Karen Widdowson.
Thank you, Chair. Just to pick up on a couple of things that have been mentioned. So you initially said that a postponement for 6 months, you did have some reservations about that. All I would say is that potentially in the actions requested that we could strengthen it and put it in the minutes that the scrutiny, directorate-based scrutiny committees and the panels could be suspended for 6 months but actually be kept under review. So possibly a review in, say, September or October time to see how the pandemic situation is progressing. So that is a possibility we could do that. But I do strongly believe, though, that 6 months is probably the right length of time, bearing in mind the level of officer resources to feed the machinery of the different scrutiny committees. The item which Councillor Draycott mentioned regarding questions. So we do have the provision in our constitution already for questions on notice from members of the public and indeed our councillors to submit them, and they do that 6 clear working days before the meeting, 5 clear days working before the meeting. So we do have that provision already, and those will be in writing. So I suggest that we possibly try to promote that more as a way, because we do have that provision already. And I'm just looking through my notes if there was anything else that needed. And Rob Mitchell addressed the issues regarding finances and having the budget scrutiny panels directed, and we can have a report at a future meeting about the direction for the budget scrutiny panel based on how the budget process is going to happen over the next few months. So that was all I was going to add, so thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Okay, I think nobody else is indicating that they want to speak on that one now. I get the understanding that people are comfortable with the suspension of the panels, and there's been a few comments that will hopefully be useful on allowances. So we just need to move to a vote on whether people want to go with option 1 or option 2. So if we can go around alphabetically like we've done before, and if you can indicate your preference. So option 1, so if I just give you a reminder quickly. So option 1 is using the Scrutiny Commission with existing membership and cycle of meetings. And option 2 is using the membership of the calling committee, which includes all scrutiny committee chairs and vice chairs as a single committee. So if we can go around alphabetically, and if you can just give me option 1 or option 2. So if we start with Councillor Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. Option 1.
Thank you. And Councillor Baines?
Option 1, Chair.
Councillor Bolton?
Thank you, Chair. Option 1.
Councillor Draycott?
Option 1, Chair.
Councillor Hadji Nicolau?
Thank you, Chair. Option 1.
Thank you. Councillor Parsons?
Yes, happy with option 1.
Thank you. And my preference is option 1 too. So I think that's clear. We've got unanimous on option 1 as our way forward.
And I can confirm as the report author that everybody is voting there for option 1, and therefore the scrutiny, directorate-based scrutiny committees will be postponed for a period of 6 months with a review in due course, potentially in September, October time. Okay, anything else we needed to pick up? I think there was there. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Okay, so I think we're ready to move on to item 7 on the agenda. So we've got pre-decision scrutiny of any specific financial matters to be considered by Cabinet, and there are no items of this nature to be considered today. Item 8 is Cabinet items for pre-decision scrutiny. So the following items have been identified for pre-decision scrutiny from the Cabinet agenda for 4th of June 2020. So item 8A is the COVID-19 Council approach to community, economic and organisational recovery. So if I hand over to Rob Mitchell, who's going to introduce the report for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'll keep my comments relatively brief, but I just want to say it is good to see the Scrutiny Commission back up and running in its new online format, and it is going to be important that we do make use of the committees going forward to help inform and scrutinise our approach to the recovery. As you know, the Council has been playing a leading role in responding to the pandemic. We've been actively engaged in a whole range of response issues, working closely with the Resilience Forum, which is a multi-agency forum across Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland. I think you're probably updated on the work that we've done through our various communications channels in terms of supporting the community and supporting local businesses. And I think we can be proud actually as a council of how we've risen to that immediate challenge. And at the same time, adjusting our services, moving our staff to working online whilst protecting the most vulnerable in society and also supporting our economy and local businesses. So throughout that response, we have had one eye to a range of sort of future scenarios and recovery, and working with the Resilience Forum, we are now managing both the ongoing response to the pandemic, but also the recovery phase. And obviously the report to Cabinet, which you're considering tonight, is initially setting out our first thoughts on how we would deal with the recovery phase. I think it is important to stress, though, that the response is still ongoing and there are still many issues that we need to address as a council, and that does cause a significant stretch on our resources in regards to managing both the normal business of the council as far as is possible, the initial response, but also now planning for recovery as well. You can see from the report that our approach is split into 3 different theme areas in terms of supporting the community, supporting businesses and organisational recovery, and that will help us set out a really structured approach, help us resource and manage and obviously monitor our response to the COVID-19 pandemic and of course the social and economic fallout that comes with that. We're very conscious that we need to work with our partners, we need to work with members, and we need to work with our communities. This is not something we can do alone. This is something we need to galvanise our partners and our communities in order for us to be able to respond as best we can with our resources to the challenges that lie ahead. And we are now very much engaged in responding into the pandemic. So I think I'll pause at that point, other than to say a really big thank you to everybody that has supported both members and officers. As I say, the council can be very proud of what it's achieved in the crisis, and that has been a testimony to the hard work of our colleagues in the council. So I wanted to put on record publicly my thanks to them for that, but also just to note that this is a marathon, I think we've said, not a sprint, and it very much feels like that. This is still an ongoing and enduring crisis with a whole range of issues, particularly the economic side, which has not yet really been seen or come into full effect. So I think I'll pause there and we'll take questions. Simon and Eileen are both here to support and can answer in detail on some of the elements of the plan. So thank you very much, and back to you, Chair.
Thank you, Rob. I've got sort of 2 or 3 sort of comments and questions, and then if the rest of the members, if you can use your blue hand and raise to indicate that you want to speak, I'll go through everyone in order. So if I just go through my comments just briefly. So first of all, I just want to say I'm really pleased with the report that we've had. I think the new structure to have the 3 key elements of the recovery plan looks really clear. So I really like the way that it looks like we're moving. I wanted to ask the question on how you see member involvement in the recovery going forward. I just think it's really important that the members are included, so not just informed, but actually involved. I think it's important that we utilise their connections with their wards. And I think that if we can, the way they know their areas and they know their residents, and their residents are likely to speak to their ward member, maybe then go direct to the council, and it's just ensuring that we can utilise that in the recovery I think hearing directly from the public is going to be a really important part of how we move forward. Second point is on the building community connections. So rather than continue, it's on page 29, section C, is rather than continue to, I think we need to go a step further. So it's to do with the activities, keeping people active and outdoors. I'd like to know how we're going to encourage and facilitate residents to continue with their outdoor exercise. So obviously, since the pandemic's happened, we're seeing so many people that don't normally exercise at all or don't normally exercise outdoors. Actually, I want to see us encourage people to continue that as we move forward. So rather than just sort of say that we're going to maintain what we've already been doing, I think we need to word it so that we're actually wanting to push forward and encourage that further, and perhaps look at coordinated use of outdoor spaces. So actually led by the borough. And then just the last point, just on backing our business, page 30, section E, where it's the communication and engagement with local businesses. I think that should be the top point. It's maybe a little bit pedantic, but you've got 5 points on that section, backing our business. And I think the number one point in all of that should be the communication and engagement with the businesses. All the points are important, but I just think that should be our number one point and not the last one. If I hand over to who wants to pick that up, Rob.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Happy to pick up some of those points, although colleagues may want to add their thoughts as well. Very helpful comments. I think it is going to be really, really important that we engage with members. I think there is a role there for them to act as a conduit, a voice in terms of communicating with our residents, providing them with information, but also feeding back into the council in terms of issues that they are seeing in the community. I just wanted to mention as well that we do intend for, I think it was very pleasing to see on the previous item that members recognise the additional resource implications that we're seeing at the moment and the move to a sort of more streamlined approach to scrutiny. But that said, we do intend, and we will see quite a number of our other committees still operating. So there will be a role for members in regards to the ongoing committee meetings, but particularly in regards to the community work, I suspect there is quite a opportunity to engage with members and to involve them in making sure that we have understood the impact in that community area and working with them and some parish councils in terms of what we can provide in the community as part of that overall response. I think in terms of the detail of that, we need to consider that in a bit more time just to work out exactly how we do it. But I agree with your points, Chair, on that issue. Just in terms of the community connections and the ongoing, there are some positives that have come out of this whole crisis, and seeing people out and about exercising, although sometimes frustratingly while I'm sat at my desk working, has been a positive thing. And I think the teams of officers we have and the work on the leisure side of things, there is an opportunity to reset that and look at how we deliver it differently. And that is some of the work that the officers are considering at the moment, is how we can make use of some of those changes, and also the online use of technology to run classes, which we've already adapted to as part of our initial response. So I think those are points we can build on and develop further, as you suggest, Chair. And in regards to your last point, I think we quite happily move the item from the bottom of the list to the top. It's been a feature of our response so far to up the level of communications and engagement with our businesses, and I do feel that that's something, as with the communities, that we need to continue doing that and to step it up as far as we can to hear what's going on in their businesses, in their sectors, to ensure that we are able to act accordingly and stay informed of the issues. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So Councillor Draycott, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'd also like to start with a big thank you to all of the council staff for the excellent work they've been doing over the last few months and being able to maintain as many of the services as possible, sometimes in very difficult circumstances. So well done on that. A few things to do with the report. First of all, on page 21, to do with risk management. I see again, it's a green. I've read the wording very carefully, I do feel, though, that we're in unprecedented times, and we can't just rely on the fact that the Local Resilience Forum has managed to work till now. So I would have thought that would have been at least like a faint orange or a yellow, at least, Chair. And then a few questions, if I may. On the cells that's mentioned in the report that we'll be looking at the various areas, I wonder where the following will fit. So first question is the fact that councillors are very keen to get back physically into their wards and dealing with casework, which the chair touched on at the beginning. So where does the fact that councillors' casework, which is termed as business as usual, where will that fit in this recovery plan? Because all of us as councillors have got a backlog of things that are on hold that need attention as soon as possible. So that's my first question. The other, I'd be really interested to know what the sickness and staffing issues are at the moment, and how that's how the pandemic has impacted on the staff. So will that be included in future reports? Is my second question. And finally, my third question is really that IT has really excelled during this period. And we've seen how important now that IT is, and the recognition needs to be there because it's maintaining all of the work that we're now doing. So how's that going to be addressed? And I'm sorry, Chair, there is a final point, and it does go back to the first report, the Scrutiny Structure report. If scrutiny is going to be so important in the next 6 months and all the work it's doing, then I would make the plea that Cabinet has to listen to us and not just ignore what we are doing, which they do on most occasions. So if we are making sensible suggestions and comments and asking for changes and what have you, I really feel that it needs to be more of a partnership than it has been, and that Cabinet, if this is all agreed the way forward, Cabinet really does need to listen to Scrutiny. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Draycott. Does anyone want to come back on any of the comments there that Councillor Draycott made?
Happy to,
Rob?
Chair.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So just to come back on a few of those points, and colleagues again may or may not wish to add to them. So thank you for the words of support, and thanks to the employees. They're greatly received and appreciated. In terms of the risk management and the risk assessments, I'm quite happy to have another look at that. I think there is considerable risk still associated with the whole of the pandemic, and we do have a separate risk assessment specifically for certain items. So we break down from an overall risk down into specific areas of risk management related to specific themes and issues. But on the particular point you've raised, I'll happily have another look at that, Councillor Draycott. In terms of the cells and the casework and how does that fit in, I guess the councillor's casework cuts across both the economic and also the organisational and the community work. I think specifically we need to provide some support perhaps and have a discussion with members about caseworking being out and about and how to do that safely in terms of some of the issues related to COVID-19. Where we stand at the moment in terms of capacity, if you have urgent pieces of casework that are significantly impacting on residents' lives or businesses, then it is absolutely fine to raise those with officers. But I would still like at the moment, as far as you can, for some of the less urgent items to be held back and to be left where possible for the time being. We are, and I've said it already, and apologies for saying it again, but we are finding that officers are being asked to do additional things over and above their normal work, or been abstracted to support on particular priorities that we have. We do want to encourage as much business as usual but certainly for the time being, I think if you could keep to the urgent casework, that would be much appreciated. Sickness and staffing, I think as part of the Scrutiny Commission's work going forward, we could certainly provide an update on how we have responded and what the current situation is. I'm pleased to report that generally our sickness absence levels are no worse than the normal period for this time of year, although that has fluctuated and does change depending on a whole range of matters. Where, of course, we do have some abstractions is that a number of staff are still shielding, although, again, that moves at a pace, and we'll be reviewing that given some of the changes in the government guidance recently. So I think, in short, we can provide more details at future meetings. We have obviously seen a very different set of HR impacts, with people working from home and support for mental well-being and so on being much more important, perhaps now, given the risk of social isolation or people feeling distanced from their colleagues. And we have put lots of measures in place to support employees on that. In regards to the Cabinet, I think we can play those points back to Cabinet, but obviously we have some constitutional factors to take into account there. I'm sure Cabinet listen very closely to whatever Scrutiny Commission and other bodies have to tell them. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Rob. I think we might have a couple of members of Cabinet as attendees as well. So I think they'll be hearing, and obviously we've got Councillor Harper-Davies with us today as well. I've got 3 people waiting, so if we go to Councillor Bolton and then Councillor Parsons and then Councillor Baines afterwards. So Councillor Bolton, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just a very quick point that builds on the point that Councillor Rattray was making. You were talking particularly about people taking external exercise. Something that I have been very conscious of in the last 3 months in Shelthorpe Ward is the most amazing sense of community and how people have been helping people, whether it's taking their dogs for a walk or delivering shopping. And the community spirit in Shelthorpe, and I've lived in Shelthorpe 22 years, is the best that I have ever seen it. And I'm sure it's pretty similar across Charnwood. And we absolutely, you know, we keep saying when we're back to normal, we'll never be back to normal. We'll be back to a different normal. But when we get there, we absolutely must not lose some of the wonderful things that have come out of the situation that we're in at the moment. That's all I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bolton. We'll go to Councillor Parsons.
Yeah, few points. One well done to Mr. Mitchell and the team. I do think it's been good. My own organisation moved 140 people out in a week to remote working, and I think some bits were much easier than we expected, and people have settled much more easily. So I have been through the same journey to not quite the same level as the council, but not far off. So, you know, well done on that. Secondly, just on the finances, I do the quick sort of fag packet estimation on the figures we're presented with, and we're about 2.6 million down on the current estimates from the figures presented. Now, I'm assuming that what it says is that's an estimate, so that's a projected 2021 total projection for the year. It doesn't say whether that's the high, median or low risk projection. So I will have to assume that's a median position. So I'm expecting to see sort of fluctuation either side of that 2.6 million. I think the issue for me, and again, back on the reason behind my concerns around all the budget issues, Treasury, Cabinet, etc., the interlinking of all of those issues is that it's about addressing the structural deficit going forward. We're all going to be dependent on a government decision as to whether they're going to do anything to tackle that structural deficit. 2.6 million right now is a big chunk to us. That's a chunk of reserves. And I wouldn't want to do that next year at that level, given where we are now and given what I believe I'm aware of with regard to the reserves and the position. So again, that whole structural piece about how we go forward is why it's so important that we on Scrutiny now keep a very beady eye. And I understand from numerous times being told, Mr. Mitchell, that I know we don't set policy on Scrutiny, but we are meant to rigorously scrutinise. And saying, I don't think that's right is a reasonable point in Scrutiny. And Cabinet can then choose to ignore us. I think Councillor Draycott, very slightly harsh. I don't think Cabinet ignore us. I think we sometimes are equally guilty in not asking the right question at the right time. but that's sometimes not our fault because we sometimes don't possess all the information. So I think it's sometimes ours, but I understand the sentiment. So I think in general, again, I come back to that key issue around that financial position. I hope desperately that we don't just drop back into the norm. And I hope that Cabinet, along with lead officers, are looking at how we can make a step change in how we operate going forward, and what we are and what we do and how we present ourselves as a council. This is a very unique opportunity, and good organisations will grasp it and recognise going forward things will be different. Very mundane, mediocre organisations will fairly quickly slip back to the norm. All the sentiments around casework and ward work, I've driven my ward about every second or third night and just spoken to people in the streets who are out walking. And I sense already many of them are settling back into the norm. In the conversations, everyone's on very high alert. And the conversations in week 1 and 2 are very different to the conversations when I stop people in weeks, whatever we are now, 8 and 9. And the world is, there's this sense of unlocking. I hope we don't just drop back in. I hope we can do something which significantly step changes and makes us that much better going forward. Because otherwise, I'm not sure that we will survive in the current form and in the current financial climate going forward.
Thanks, Councillor Parsons. Rob, did you want to pick up any of the points from Councillor Parsons?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just to come back briefly on those, Simon may want to comment on the finances specifically, so I'll let him cover that in a short moment. But I just would concur that I don't think we have any intention of dropping back into the old way of business as it was. There have been some big gains with people working from home, and we've heard about some of the benefits from the community side of things as well. So the whole emphasis is on building back better and trying to take the positives from the situation for both us and the community and the business, but also making sure that we are able to meet the challenges that are undoubtedly coming our way. So that is something that we're very actively trying to do. But I'll hand over to Simon perhaps just to comment on the finances. Thank you.
Thanks, Rob, and thanks, Chair. Yeah, just to comment on Councillor Parsons' remark. It is, I think, a central position that we've created those estimates from. I would probably rate it as being slightly on the conservative side, so it's slightly pessimistic, but unfortunately not very pessimistic, and there probably would be additional downtime. I will just add that, observe that things are extremely volatile, and they're, I think, particularly on the income side. So anyone's guess is as good as my guess, or the team's guess, on things like when car park income will return to its pre-COVID levels, if indeed ever it does, and things like the pantomime, which is obviously a big income source for us over Christmas. It's very much up in the air whether we're going to hold a pantomime or not. As it happens, just for information, those estimates you see assume that we would not have a pantomime. So if we did manage to have a pantomime of some description, then that would obviously be a positive. But you know, I fully agree with all the other comments. The estimates show that we'll be using £2.5 million worth of reserves in addition to what we've budgeted. So of course we did budget to use the most part of £1 million this year as well. So there's a very limited period indeed on which we can attempt to run the current level of deficit. And I think in that report we are planning to have a mid-year look at the budget, which would also impact on the previous paper and the approach to scrutiny and how budget scrutiny fits into that. But I think certainly from my perspective, there's no doubt at all that we will need to move quickly, consolidate some of our gains, and look to create a step change in how we finance and run the council going forward.
Thank you, Simon. If we can go to Councillor Baines now, please. I
wanted to build on that actually, because my back of the fact bracket estimations, I was down by about 6.6 million before any sale. Regardless of exactly what it is, and obviously we need to work out what it is. It seems to me that what this situation has done for most organisations, whether that's businesses or universities, or indeed councils, is driven forward, accelerated the pace of change. And what I'm wondering is how this affects our agenda for commercialisation, which already was interested in trying to, if you like, recover some of the funding that the insufficient funding that we had, or digital transformation, which many organisations are now accelerating their plans on, or indeed working with other councils in partnership. Otherwise, we may be in a situation where we're forced to make these changes in ways that we really don't want to undertake. And I just wondered what the council's thoughts were, officers' thoughts were on those points I make.
Rob, did you want to come back, or does one of the other officers want to pick that up?
Yes, I'll come back briefly on those points, if I may, please, Chair, and thank you for those points, Councillor Baines. I think you're right. The pace of change has accelerated as a consequence, and similar to Councillor Parsons, we managed to get people working from home very quickly, and much more quickly than we thought we would be able to do. What we now need to make sure we've got is a sustained and well-considered approach to that over the longer term, and making sure we have all the right policies, all the right IT, and all of the right support for staff to allow them to continue to do that. And that's something that we're working on, and you will see some of those points in the report that we're considering tonight, and Cabinet will consider when they meet. We're also resetting and reviewing the agenda around commercialisation. I think it's still a very important area for us in terms of we will need to be more commercial in our thinking and our approach. We may or may not seek to purchase commercial property depending on a whole range of factors. But I think we will also want to look at how we can use our commercial thinking and approach and link that somewhat with regeneration and how we support local business, how we support the town centre as that changes. And I think that is the angle that we'll start to see move through. The issue for us there will be that some of those schemes are potentially longer term, and we still, as we've heard tonight, have a short-term issue that we need to address. So yes, I think these are the sorts of topics that the Scrutiny Commission may wish to have some more detail on at future meetings, but I think they're all very well made points. Working with other councils is something that we're very adept at doing already, and we have a couple of business cases where we're looking at that, as you're aware, around building control, for example. And I think that will be something that we will accelerate as we go forward, and we're communicating with other councils about how we might seek to do that. So I'll pause there, and I'm not sure if any of my colleagues may have further points, but thank you.
Simon, was there anything you wanted to pick up?
I think I would agree with that. I think commercialisation is interesting. I think the new rules that are likely to come in are going to not make it impossible, but make it more difficult to do things around commercial property. But as I would absolutely agree with Rob, I see this is very important. We do have an existing portfolio of assets which are for semi-commercial use, which I think we need to have a look at. There are other aspects of the council where we are effectively trading at the moment, which will obviously include building control. So I think a more commercial approach around those will be very helpful. And certainly as part of the organisation recovery cell, a lot of those things around what we're going to do around the organisation, transformation, efficiency, the digital agenda, and also what we're doing with our accommodation are definitely all things we're going to accelerate. And again, what we're doing around our accommodation, there's very likely to be a big commercial element with that, and what we do with our whole portfolio of assets going forward. So I think I would just sort of reiterate Rob's comments really, and agree with the points made that there are big challenges and important things to do around this area.
Thanks, Simon. Eileen, did you have anything extra you wanted to come in on?
Not on this one particularly, Chair. I think it's just important to note as we move forward with scrutiny, behind each of the themes there is an ever-growing action plan. So some of the things that members have mentioned this evening around some of the community initiatives in terms of the play and all the other support for exercise, some of the economic initiatives we're doing for businesses. We do have significant action plans that are growing, and we'll never come to the end of those, because as things emerge, like regulation, for example, we are picking those up. So I think a lot of this process is going to be around looking for opportunities as we move forward, and that commercialisation, the digital agenda, all of those are opportunities for us to have a really close look at how we're doing business. And I know a lot of the services have actually said, coming back to us, they thought it was going to be a lot more difficult, and they're finding it a lot easier to work in the way we're working now. And that's a real positive. And I don't think many have noticed particular drop-offs in service delivery. So our feedback, for example, in planning, is that the targets are still being met. So I think it is possible to look at the way we are delivering our services and move them and still maintain high standards. And I think that's really important for the community.
That's great. Thanks, Eileen. If we go to Councillor Parsons now, please.
Mr. Jackson, given that a lot of the revenue coming in is very liquid revenue that we're not getting and we're not planning on getting, are we comfortable in managing our liquidity at the moment? And how are we managing that liquidity? Are we managing that liquidity through use of treasury, or are we managing liquidity through just the general accounts?
Apologies, hopefully you can hear me now.
Yep.
Unlike some of the councils, we were in a fortunate position at the year end. So we had about £55 million worth of money on the sort of short-term money markets and relatively short-term investments, so less than a year. So we've actually been able to manage our cash flow through the Treasury in the way that we would usually have done so. There has been a little bit of a shortfall in income compared to what we might expect, but there are the government funding has compensated for this in a way. So for example, we were required to offer, or as part of the government's scheme, we did offer £18 million worth of business rate relief to retail, hospitality and leisure businesses. But the good thing about that was the government are paying us or compensating us for that on a monthly basis. So actually it's taken away the collection risk which might have existed with many of those businesses, and we're now getting a secure monthly cash flow. So we are, in fairness, we are down slightly on what we might have expected, but given our high levels of cash balances at the year end, that what we're down is sort of into the hundreds of thousands, the low millions, and certainly compared to the £55 million we had in hand, we've been well able to manage the issue so far. I think the issues are much more, to be fair, rather than cash flow, I think the issues are going to be much more around the budget and how we manage that. But certainly in terms of cash, and certainly as things stand at the moment and in the sort of short term, next 3, 6, 9 months, I don't anticipate any difficulties for us at all.
Councillor Parsons, did you want to come back on that at all?
No, that's fine. Thank you very much. Just wanted to understand and seek reassurance. I'm sure Audit Committee will do the same, and just seek reassurance that the cash position is strong. Thanks.
That's lovely. Thank you. I don't see anyone else indicating that they want to speak, so I think the discussion is coming to an end there. We just need to make a decision now if we support the recommendations. So I'd like to go through everyone alphabetically, and if you can just confirm to me whether you do or whether you don't support the recommendations on this one. If we go to Councillor Bailey first, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I do support the recommendations.
Thank you. Councillor Baines.
I support the recommendations.
Councillor Bolton.
Thank you, Chair. I support the recommendations.
Councillor Draycott.
Yes, thank you. Support the recommendations.
Councillor Hadji Nicolau.
Thank you. I do support the recommendations.
Councillor Parsons?
Yeah, I'm happy with it. Thank you.
And I support the recommendations too. So that's unanimous from us all. Okay, we move on to item 9. So we've got pre-decision scrutiny, so cabinet response. So Karen Widdowson is going to take us through the report here.
Thank you, Chair. This is a information item setting out the Cabinet's responses to the recommendations submitted by the Commission on items it undertook for scrutiny at its last meeting. This is purely for information. Thank you.
Thank you. If all councillors can just use their blue hand just to indicate that they've noted the report. Lovely, I can see those coming through.
Sorry, what's the blue hand?
Oh, sorry. On the right hand side, you'll have a button that says raise hand.
I'm afraid I don't have this button. So should I just raise
Yeah,
my
that's
hand?
fine. That's fine. No problem. That's it. And I'm the same too. So everyone's noted that. Thanks, Karen. Okay, so if we move on to item 10, so we've got progress with panel work. Karen Widdowson's going to take us through this report too.
Thank you, Chair. So this report sets out the scrutiny panels, and they're set out in the appendix. I don't plan on going through them in any detail because earlier the committee decided that they would suspend the scrutiny panels for a period of 6 months with a review in September, October time. The only thing I would ask that is that members, we add in an item that a report comes back in July regarding the budget process and the process for the budget scrutiny panel, if that can be added into that work programme, and everything else is suspended. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. The only other thing I wanted to mention on this is that we've had the commercialisation panel already and the report's been produced, but because we were prioritising for the agenda, that hasn't come through to us. I'd just like to suggest that that report comes to our following meeting, because I think that it would be useful with issues to do with income generation going forward. Okay, are we okay just to get that noted? Yeah, that's lovely, thank you. Okay, so if we move on to, well, actually, we just need to confirm that we are agreeing that the scrutiny panels be suspended. I know we discussed it in the item previously, but we actually have to go to a vote in this section. So if everybody's in agreement that the panels are suspended for 6 months as discussed in the previous item, if I can just go through alphabetically, and if you can just say that you agree or disagree if that is the case. So Councillor Bailey, if I can come to you first.
Thank you, Chair. Agree.
Thank you. Councillor Baines.
Agree, Chair.
Councillor Bolton.
I agree, Chair.
Councillor Draycott.
Agree, Chair.
Councillor Haji Nicolau.
I agree, Chair.
Councillor Parsons. No, he's muted, but I think he's raising his hand.
Sorry,
Oh.
I tried to raise my hand before you went to the vote, but it wasn't. I tried to raise my blue hand. I did raise my blue hand, but wasn't. I just wanted to say, I just needed to understand the last comment about the budget scrutiny bit that Mrs. Widdowson made.
Okay, so the intention is that a report comes back to the July meeting of the Scrutiny Commission, setting out the budget process along with the suggestion for how the scrutiny panel should be operating based on the budget process, so that it's picked up, because that was a part of the discussion in the earlier item on the agenda tonight. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Thank you.
With that, thank you. And I support the motion. Happy with that now.
Lovely. Thank you, Councillor Parsons. And I agree to that too.
Okay, so just to confirm that you've agreed that the scrutiny panels be suspended for 6 months, that the budget scrutiny report and the budget process be report to the next meeting, and also, as suggested by the chairman, that the commercialisation panel report findings come back to a future meeting as well. Thank you.
July.
July, yeah, July.
Thank you. So if we move on to item 11, so we've got Children and Families Wellbeing Service. It's a report from Neighbourhoods and Community Wellbeing Scrutiny. Does anyone have any comments on the report that they've received? If we go to Simon Jackson.
No, apologies, Chair. I was going to make a comment in relation to the previous item.
Do you still want to make that now?
I will do very briefly. All it was to say is we're planning to have an interim budget, so the logistics of working out how we can get budget scrutiny panel or set up a budget scrutiny panel and get it properly involved in the interim budget, and then the final budget is a sort of a bit of going to be a logistical challenge. So the report next time around will seek to address that challenge. So that's the plan. That's all I was going to say. So apologies for that.
That's okay. Thank you. If we go to Councillor Draycott, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm hoping we're speaking on the item 11 in the Children's Centres report.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
I'd like to thank the Neighbourhoods and Community Wellbeing Scrutiny Committee for looking at this. They actually recognised that the communication of performance data is very poor, but that the officers will engage through the locality team to obtain borough-specific data. This is following the big review that the County Council carried out and resulted in some of our children's centres being closed, one of them in the Hastings ward, which I represent. The committee have agreed for a further report in 6 months' time, which hopefully will fit in with the council's calendar and agenda at the end of the year, where hopefully we'll have some true data about the effect that the closure has had. So welcome the report and thank the Scrutiny Committee for the work that they've done.
Has anybody else got any comments with regards to the report? No, I don't see any other comments coming through. So I think at this stage, I think it's just if we can confirm that the report is noted.
And can I also suggest, because the action request is that whether a scrutiny panel is necessary, from what Councillor Draycott has said, is that there is a report going back to the Directorate-based Committee for all being well in 6 months' time. So we'll note that fact, and then obviously not do anything about having a panel or not at this present time. Okay.
Yes, thank you. Okay, so if we move on to item 12, we've got the scrutiny work programme. Now, obviously, based on these decisions we've made earlier in the meeting, there's not really a great deal to go through here, but I'll pass over to Karen Widdowson, who'll comment on that for us.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So the scrutiny work programme is set out in the appendices. I don't plan on going through that because there's an earlier decision to suspend the scrutiny panels, and I've got nothing further to add, to be quite frank, unless any members have any questions or queries. Thank you.
I don't see any questions coming through. So if we just go to confirming that all Directorate-based Scrutiny Committee meetings are suspended for 6 months, if I can just have everyone to agree this for me. So if we just go through, yeah, you can raise your blue hands again. That's the quickest way for us to be able to do that. Yep. Leon, can you just raise your hand for me? Yep. Yep, that's everybody. Thank you. Okay, then if we move on to item 13, So we've got the Scrutiny Commission work programme. So again, if I pass over to Karen Widdowson for this, please.
Thank you, Chairman. So this is the Scrutiny Commission work programme, and what I noted here is a couple of bits and pieces that I'd like to go through. So the annual report, that is still listed as to be programmed, and I think there is a suggestion that possibly that gets programmed November or December later this year. And there is a pre-decision scrutiny item as well in the list on for enterprise zone as well. That's potentially been going to cabinet. I think it's July time, so that's listed as a pre-scrutiny item. And I also wanted to note that potentially the meeting that's scheduled for the 29th of June may be put back by one day, and so the Scrutiny Commission meeting will be held on the 30th of June. Thank you. Any questions?
Councillor Draycott, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just as Karen has said, to do with the annual scrutiny report, it was a new structure that we had started. It hasn't yet had a full 12 months because of the pandemic. And in view of the work that we've got ahead of us, I think it's wise that we try for 18 months after its first meeting. To me, that would be good timing because we'll have had some work done as a Scrutiny Commission, but also 6 months as it's looking dealing with COVID-19 recovery plan, etc. And it would be a good time to draw all those things together in a report and then move on for a further year. So I support the idea of deferring the scrutiny annual plan for about 18 months. It's either going to be the end of this year or maybe at the start of next year. I'm sure officers will decide that when we know what the situation is. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Parsons, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to reassure other council members, any members of the public listening as well, both in terms of the last item and suspension of the meetings and suspension of the work programme, that doesn't mean issues which were currently sitting on the agendas will be forgotten. I think it's important. There are some questions within the committees, certainly within the one I chair, there are some questions due to be answered or due to be explained, which I'm completely comfortable that committees are suspended now, but that does not mean that those questions won't be asked at the appropriate time when committees reconvene, because some of those questions were important questions referring to budgetary issues particularly, and those issues won't be forgotten going forward, and the public and other members should be reassured about that. Whilst we might suspend the meetings, some of the issues will still be dealt with and addressed because the principles of dealing with those issues are still important.
Thank you, Councillor Parsons. I think you're right, it is important and it is worth clarifying that, so thank you. If we go back to Karen Widdowson, please.
Thank you, Chair. One other important matter, earlier on there was the discussion about the items, the key items coming forward from the 3 recovery cells. So we do need to add that to the work programme so that we have the heads of those recovery cells coming, taking in turn to each of the meetings. We mustn't forget that, so thank you.
Thank you. Do we need to put them in order now, or do we need to just minute the fact that that's how we want to work going forward?
Madam Chair, we can put them in an order for you, and we can do that offline because we need to liaise with the heads of those recovery cells. But I just wanted to make sure that we didn't forget that we wanted to add that into the Scrutiny Commission work programme. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Should we go to a hands up vote on that, just so that everyone confirms that they're happy to move to that new structure of having one key item in every Scrutiny Commission meeting, and that being based on the 3 cells from the recovery plan? Yep, that's everyone that's agreed. Yeah, if we can get that minuted. Thank you. Okay, then we move on to item 14. So we've got another pre-decision scrutiny item. So we're going to propose to exclude members of the public from the meeting during the consideration of the following item on the grounds that it will involve the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraph 3 of part 1 of Schedule 12A to the Local Government Act 1972. And it's considered that the public interest in maintaining the exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information. I just need a seconder for the proposal, please. I think Councillor Draycott was going to second that.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Can I just ask a question before I do?
Yep.
I'm always loath to accept reports on the private agenda. And this report to me would have been quite easy to have actually put into two parts, one on the open agenda and one on the private agenda. So I do think an opportunity has been missed. And I'd really like to ask if any of the officers could explain why that wasn't a consideration before I second it, if that's possible, please.
Yeah. Rob, should I go to you, or do you want to pass that on to... Oh, Karen Widdowson wants to answer that one for us. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you, Chair. In my capacity as Deputy Monitoring Officer, I'd like to confirm that the report contains information about the financial and business affairs of the leisure centre contractor and the authority, i.e. Charmel Borough Council, that actually holds that information as well. And the Monitoring Officer deemed that the whole report should be made exempt. And that's the reason why the whole report has been made exempt. So thank you.
Thank you. If I could come back, Chair, because a lot of councils are taking a similar report to their meetings at the moment, and there'd be no surprises about what councils have been doing between March and now, at the beginning of June. So I still think that the business could have been separated into two parts, one on the open agenda and one on the closed agenda. So my question still remains, why wasn't that a consideration?
Want to pick that up, Karen Widdowson?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So I can't speak for the Monitoring Officer who's not here this evening, but I do know that we had a discussion as to the content of the report, and it was deemed that the whole report should be made confidential or exempt. There wasn't a discussion about splitting it, having an appendix. So the whole report is considered to be exempt this evening, and again when it goes to Cabinet on Thursday evening. Thank you.
Okay, well I won't labour the point, Chair. I've made it. So with that, I'll second what you moved.
Thank you, Councillor Draycott. Okay, so we need to go to a vote now. It's been proposed and seconded. If can each member confirm verbally if they are for the proposal, which is to move into an exempt item. So if I go through alphabetically again, please, and if you can say if you're for the proposal. So Councillor Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. For.
Councillor Baines.
For.
Councillor Bolton.
For.
Councillor Draycott.
Reluctantly for, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Hadji Nicolau.
For.
Councillor Parsons.
For.
And I'm Councillor Rattray and I'm for. So thank you. If we can now move to a closed session, if we can